and they were formed from radioactivity that existed for just a short period of time, then we've got some explaining to do. I had some explaining to do. There's something that doesn't fit. The radioactivity that produced the polonium halos would have disappeared long before the rocks of the Earth cooled down. And there's an analogy, or a very simple experiment that we want to do at this time to try to illustrate what we're talking about here. We have the halos, these polonium halos, and as a result of that, we have an enigma. The polonium halos are formed by radioactivity that exists for just a short period of time, and then it disappears. But in the process of disappearing, some way, somehow, it's left a record in the rocks. Now, we want to illustrate that tonight by the following experiment, very simple experiment. We're going to take some water, and we can turn the 35mm projector off now and turn the other one on. And the radioactivity, as we've said, has a fleeting existence. Now, we're going to put something into the water at this time and make an analogy with respect to what would happen if something were liquid. In other words, if the rocks were still liquid, if the molten material was there instead of being a solid rock, and the radioactivity was in a molten material, it's not going to retain a registration. You won't produce any coloration, so to speak. Here we have an Alka-Seltzer in the water. The bubbles are coming out very rapidly. Now, if you could freeze that water instantly, you would see the bubbles retained within the water itself. This photograph that has just been given to me freezes the process of the bubbles in time. Now, in order for, as I look at the picture here, we have frozen the bubble process in time. Now, we can turn the overhead, we can turn all the lights back on at the present time. If we all come and look at the water now, we know that the bubbles are gone. The radioactivity, unless encountered or surrounded by the mineral itself in a solid form, would have done just what the Alka-Seltzer bubbles did. They would have disappeared within a very brief period of time. In other words, the rock had to be solid within a time frame consistent with the half-life of the radioactivity, within 3 minutes. Well, when this thought came to me some 20 or more years ago, I was stunned, because it occurred to me that indeed something had been left in the rocks deliberately as evidence for creation. There's a text in the Bible which I mentioned in my book. In fact, this text came to my mind one day as I was sitting in the microscope and I was looking at some of these halos, wondering how in the world I could reconcile the short half-life and the long cooling period. And the thought came to me indeed that it had to be an instantaneous formation, crystallization, creation in order for this to happen. That was way back in 1965. And the verse in the Bible that came to me was in the book of Psalms, Psalm 33, verses 6 and 9. And despite the fact that I'm at the University of Tennessee, I'm going to quote the verse. It says, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast." I was stunned. I didn't go out and shout it to the housetops. I didn't know whether it was true or not. It was a thought. But I didn't know whether it was true. I didn't know what the scientific aspects were going to be. But I decided to try to pursue the topic until the very end. So the next few years, I was still there in my home doing experiments, setting up a laboratory in the bathroom to do experiments in the middle of the night after the children had gone to bed. And fortunately, my financial situation began to improve somewhat, and I was finally taken on by a small college up in Maryland. And in the process of doing this, began more extensive investigation into these phenomena that we're talking about, trying to determine whether there was any other way scientifically that one could explain the polonium halos. I didn't want to go out and tell who were Christians. I didn't want to try to publish it in a religious magazine. I felt the only honest thing to do was to present this material to the scientific community, publish it in the open scientific literature in such a way so that if I was doing something wrong, or by this time I had become a Christian, if I was letting my biases come into my thinking, and these really weren't created rocks at all, and I just was dreaming about something being evidence for creation, certainly the people who were like myself, evolutionists, would certainly be able to spot what was wrong. Well, it was fortunate for me at this time that some other things I was doing in my research came to the attention of some individuals here in Oak Ridge. And I was very fortunate to be able to ask to come down and become a guest scientist for a year. And I was exceedingly fortunate for that year to stretch to 2 years and 3 years and 4 years and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. And all the time I was there, I was carrying on research on what I'm talking about tonight, but I was also doing something else, which is what they asked me to do, or asked me to come down for. I was a guest there. I wasn't being paid by the laboratory. I had very, very cordial relations with everyone there, as far as I know, and still, everyone there is still my friend. I don't know whether it's the other way around these days or not. But in any event, I stayed there for 12 and a half years, and during that 12 and a half year period of time, published a number of scientific reports relating to what I'm telling you about tonight. And that is information that would indicate, indeed, that these polonium halos are there, separate from uranium. They are primordial. The radioactivity that formed them simply was brought into existence. And that means that the rocks themselves are not rocks which evolved over a long period of time, but are rocks which were created. Created rocks, in my book, I identify, or I call, the Genesis rocks of our planet. If you're going to be a creationist, if you're going to believe in the Bible record of creation at all, one of the first things, in my opinion, you've got to face is the fact that somewhere in the earth today you've got to find something that was created. The whole earth can't be today something that's redone so badly that you can't find something that's original. And so I say these rocks that I'm holding here tonight in front of you are part of the original created rocks of the earth. Well, in any event, all the documentation, all the reports, all the obstacles that I had in the process of publishing information for creation is documented here in the book. But in December of 1981, in October 27, 1981, I was in my office and I received a long-distance telephone call from the Deputy Attorney General from the state of Arkansas. He was asking me to come and testify at the Arkansas creation trial. Earlier that year, the state of Arkansas had passed a law requiring the balanced teaching of science, of origins, in the public schools. Creation science would be taught along with evolution. Well, as Americans, we have the privilege of differing on this viewpoint. And there are people who feel that this shouldn't be done. In fact, the American Civil Liberties Union, in fact, there are many Christians and other people of other persuasions who feel very, very strongly it should not be done. Well, I didn't know whether to. In fact, I did not volunteer to get into the fray at all. In fact, when the names of the scientists were sent to the Deputy Attorney General back earlier, September or whatever, my name was not on the list at all. But here in October, I was being called. In fact, a friend had called me earlier that morning, and one thing had led to another. And I'd received that call, and the Deputy Attorney General was asking whether I would consider coming to testify at the Arkansas creation trial. Well, a lot was at stake for me, because if there's one thing in this life I love to do, it's research. I've been doing research since 1962, thinking about the topic of origins and evolution and halos and so forth for some 20-some-odd years almost. It was a night and day situation, and the idea that I might somehow put myself in a situation where publicity would come about that would be negative and would take me out of that golden, wonderful opportunity I had was something I didn't really want to think about. But nevertheless, there were some things that made me decide that I should go. And that's the reason I'm here tonight. While I was at the laboratory, while I was publishing, from time to time, individuals, scientists who are evolutionists, would read, of course, about the work that I had done, and they would see the results. And they would say, well, we don't know how to explain what you found. We don't know how to explain the polonium halos and the granites and so forth. But there must be an explanation of some sort. And so, therefore, we don't know what the explanation is tonight or today as we were writing, as they were writing in and commenting on my work. But sometimes someone would provide an explanation. Well, this happened in 1979. I had given a paper down at Louisiana State University